the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. In the sweltering heat of a Cretan summer, a small group of men, disguised as local shepherds, made their way across the rugged terrain. Their leader, a Dane with piercing blue eyes and straw-blonde hair, pushed them relentlessly, his gaze fixed on their target, the German-occupied Castelli Air Base. Anders Lassen, a veteran of daring raids and a man fueled by a deep hatred of the Nazis, was determined to strike a blow against the Luftwaffe. Their journey had been long and arduous, traversing treacherous mountains and avoiding enemy patrols. They relied on the support of the Cretan resistance, who shared their hatred of the occupiers and provided them with food, shelter, and invaluable intelligence. But the ever-present threat of German reprisals hung over them like a dark cloud. They had witnessed firsthand the brutality of the occupiers, the executions of innocent civilians, and the destruction of villages. These atrocities fueled their determination to fight back, to avenge the fallen, and to bring hope to a people suffering under the Nazi yoke. Reaching their hideout, a small cave overlooking the airbase, Lassen and his men observed their target. Rows of Stuka dive bombers and Junkers 88 Schnellbombers, the pride of the German Air Force, sat on the runway, tempting targets for the raiders. They also identified the fuel and ammunition dumps, crucial for keeping the Luftwaffe operational. Lassen, with his keen eye for detail, meticulously mapped out the airbase defenses, noting the positions of sentry towers, searchlights, and machine gun nests. He knew that success would depend on meticulous planning, flawless execution, and a healthy dose of luck. Lassen's men were a motley crew, a mix of seasoned veterans and untested recruits, each with their unique skills and motivations. Sergeant Jack Nicholson, a stoic Scotsman and a survivor of the disastrous Dieppe raid, served as Lassen's right-hand man, his calm demeanor and unwavering loyalty providing a steadying influence on the impulsive Dane. Ray Jones, a young gunner from Birmingham, was eager to prove himself in battle, his youthful enthusiasm tempered by a healthy respect for the dangers they faced. And Sidney Greaves, a former miner, brought his unwavering determination and physical strength to the group. His stoicism, a reflection of the hardships he had endured in the coal mines. With the night of the attack approaching, Lassen divided his small force. Nicholson and Greaves would target the eastern side of the airbase, focusing on the fuel and ammunition dumps. Lassen and Jones would create a diversion on the western side, drawing the enemy's attention away from their comrades and giving them the opportunity to inflict maximum damage. Lassen knew that their mission was suicidal, but he also knew that it was essential for disrupting German operations and bringing the war closer to an end. Under the cover of darkness, they set out, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. Lassen and Jones crept towards the airbase perimeter, the beams of searchlights sweeping the landscape like predatory eyes, their movements cloaked in the shadows of the night. They cut through the barbed wire fence, adrenaline coursing through their veins, and slipped into the enemy's lair. Every sound, every rustle of leaves seemed amplified in the tense silence. Reaching the first aircraft hangar, they could hear the sounds of laughter and chatter from within. German airmen and technicians, unaware of the danger lurking outside, enjoyed a rare moment of respite, their thoughts perhaps drifting to loved ones back home. Lassen and Jones skirted around the building, avoiding the searchlights, and reached the taxiway where the warplanes were parked, their dark shapes silhouetted against the night sky. They crept past the squat forms of the Stukas, their eyes searching for a suitable target. Lassen spotted a Ju 88 Schnellbomber, its sleek silhouette illuminated by a distant floodlight. He knew this was the prize he sought, a symbol of German air power and a valuable asset for the enemy. With a swift dash, he crossed the open ground and reached the aircraft, just as the sentries turned away, their backs to the impending chaos. Climbing onto the wing, Lassen pulled out 2 loose bombs from his backpack. These improvised explosives, a mix of diesel oil, plastic explosives, and thermite, were designed to cause maximum damage, their incendiary power capable of turning aircraft into blazing infernos. He placed the bombs carefully, ensuring they would ignite the fuel tanks and create a devastating inferno that would light up the night sky. Meanwhile, Nicholson and Greaves had successfully infiltrated the eastern side of the airbase. They planted charges on a Storch reconnaissance plane and a Ju-88 Schnellbomber, the timers ticking down towards detonation, their every move cloaked in the darkness. Nicholson, spotting a Stuka dive bomber, the symbol of German air power and a source of terror for Allied troops, couldn't resist adding it to their list of targets, his determination to destroy this hated aircraft fueled by memories of fallen comrades. As they prepared to set the final charge, a single gunshot echoed across the airbase, a sharp crack that shattered the stillness of the night. It was the signal that Lassen was in action. The carefully planned raid had begun. Chaos erupted on Castelli Air Base. Explosions ripped through the night, shattering the silence and illuminating the sky with a fiery glow. Flames engulfed aircraft, turning them into blazing infernos that cast long shadows across the runway. The screams of dying men mingled with the staccato bursts of gunfire, creating a cacophony of violence and destruction. Lassen and Jones, caught in the inferno they had created, fought their way towards the perimeter fence, their movements hampered by the thick smoke and the debris that littered the ground. They were pursued by German soldiers, their faces illuminated by the burning wreckage, their shouts of anger and confusion filling the air as they searched for the elusive saboteurs. Nicholson and Greaves, witnessing the carnage from the eastern side, believed their comrades were lost. They made a hasty retreat, their hearts pounding with a mix of relief and grief, leaving behind a trail of destruction that would cripple the Luftwaffe's operations on Crete. The fuel and ammunition dumps, ignited by their well-placed charges, erupted in a series of massive explosions, sending shockwaves across the island and turning the night sky into a terrifying spectacle of fire and smoke. Lassen and Jones, against all odds, reached the fence and escaped into the darkness. But the Dane, his eyes gleaming with a thirst for destruction that seemed to grow with each successful raid, was not satisfied. He led Jones back into the airbase, determined to inflict further damage on the enemy, his courage bordering on recklessness. They planted more charges on aircraft and fuel trucks, their actions pushing the boundaries of sanity as they reveled in the chaos they had unleashed. The airbase was now a sea of fire, a testament to Lassen's unwavering determination and his insatiable desire for revenge against those who had inflicted so much suffering on his homeland and the people he had come to care for. But their luck couldn't hold forever. In the confusion of battle, Lassen and Jones became separated, the smoke and the darkness obscuring their vision and making it impossible to stay together. Lassen, refusing to abandon his comrade, went back into the inferno to search for him, his loyalty to his men overriding any sense of self-preservation. He found no trace of Jones, but he did find more targets. He planted his last remaining loose bombs on a Caterpillar tractor, then made his final escape, his body battered and bruised, his clothes singed by the flames. As he slipped through the fence, Castelli Air Base was a scene of utter devastation, a testament to the audacity and effectiveness of the raiders. The once proud symbol of German air power was now a smoldering ruin, its aircraft reduced to twisted metal, its buildings collapsed into heaps of rubble. Lassen, exhausted and wounded, hid in a nearby cabbage field, his body aching, his mind racing. He knew the Germans would be hunting for him, their anger fueled by the humiliation he had inflicted upon them, their desire for revenge burning as fiercely as the fires that still raged on the airbase. But the Cretan people, inspired by his courage and his defiance, would protect him. They would shelter him in their villages, risking their own lives to keep him safe, guide him through the mountains, using their knowledge of the hidden paths to evade the enemy and help him escape the island. Their solidarity a testament to the bonds forged between the raiders and the local resistance. The raids on Castelli and Heraklion, along with other daring operations across the Aegean, had a profound impact on the war. They disrupted German supply lines, making it difficult for the enemy to reinforce their troops and maintain their operations. They demoralized enemy troops, who lived in constant fear of the next surprise attack, never knowing when or where the raiders would strike. And they tied down valuable resources, forcing the Germans to divert troops and equipment to defend their positions and hunt for the elusive raiders. But these victories came at a heavy cost. The Germans, enraged by the audacity of the raiders, unleashed a campaign of brutal reprisals against the Greek people, their fury knowing no bounds. Villages were destroyed, their homes reduced to ashes, their streets stained with the blood of the innocent. Civilians were executed, their lives snuffed out in acts of senseless violence, and the islands were plunged into a state of terror, the people living in constant fear of the occupiers' wrath. Lassen, haunted by the suffering he had witnessed, the images of the dead and the dying seared into his memory, vowed to continue the fight. He would take the war to the enemy, wherever they might be found, whether on the sun-drenched islands of the Aegean or the battle-scarred landscapes of mainland Europe. And he would not rest until the Nazis were defeated, their reign of terror brought to an end, and his beloved Denmark, along with all the other nations groaning under the Nazi yoke, was free. His journey would take him across the Mediterranean, from the sun-baked islands of Greece, where he had earned the respect and admiration of the local resistance, to the blood-soaked battlefields of Italy, where he would face a new set of challenges and confront the horrors of conventional warfare. He would become a legend, his name whispered in awe and fear, a symbol of defiance against tyranny and a beacon of hope for the oppressed. And his name, Anders Lassen, would be forever etched in the annals of Special Forces history, a testament to his unwavering courage, his exceptional leadership, and his unwavering determination to fight for what he believed in. Lassen's path led him to the Special Boat Squadron, SBS, a newly formed unit of the Special Air Service, AS, specializing in amphibious raids. He found himself among kindred spirits, men who shared his disdain for rigid military discipline, his thirst for adventure, and his unwavering determination to defeat the enemy. Together they embarked on a series of daring missions across the Aegean, striking at German garrisons, disrupting supply lines, and sowing chaos and fear in the hearts of the enemy. They became known as the Long-Haired Boys, a band of mavericks who operated outside the confines of conventional warfare, their unconventional tactics and their disregard for authority both infuriating and terrifying their enemies. One of their most audacious operations was the raid on the island of Symi. Lassen and his men, disguised as local fishermen, their weathered faces and sun-bleached hair blending seamlessly with the islanders, landed under the cover of darkness and overwhelmed the Italian garrison, their silent movements and their surprise attack catching the enemy completely off guard. They captured the island without firing a shot, their presence alone enough to convince the Italians to surrender, then set about fortifying their positions, turning the island into a stronghold from which they could launch further raids and harass the enemy. The Germans, enraged by the loss of Symi, their pride wounded by the audacity of the raiders, launched a fierce counterattack, determined to reclaim the island and punish those who had dared to defy them. Stuka dive bombers, the screech of their sirens a harbinger of death and destruction, pounded the island, reducing buildings to rubble and inflicting heavy casualties on the civilian population, their bombs leaving behind a trail of devastation and despair. Lassen, undeterred by the enemy's overwhelming firepower, his spirit unyielding in the face of adversity, took command of a captured Italian anti-aircraft gun, its heavy barrel pointed towards the sky, its ammunition belts loaded and ready. He fought back with ferocious determination, his eyes scanning the skies for the telltale silhouettes of the Stukas, his fingers tightening on the trigger as he unleashed a torrent of fire, his every shot aimed at bringing down the hated dive bombers. He and his men held their ground, their courage and their skill defying the odds, repelling the German assault and inflicting heavy losses on the enemy. Their victory a testament to their unwavering resolve. But the victory on Symi was short-lived. The Germans, determined to reclaim the island and avenge their defeat, their pride demanding retribution, launched a relentless bombing campaign, their aircraft returning day after day to rain down death and destruction on the island. The islanders, caught in the crossfire, their homes destroyed, their lives shattered, suffered terribly, their cries of anguish echoing through the ruins of their once peaceful community. Lassen, witnessing their plight, his heart heavy with sorrow and anger, was torn between his duty to his men, his responsibility to keep them safe and complete their mission, and his compassion for the innocent civilians. his empathy for their suffering driving him to protect them at all costs. In the end, faced with the impossible choice between continuing the fight and saving the lives of the islanders, he was forced to order a withdrawal, his voice heavy with regret as he gave the command that would leave behind a devastated island and a people traumatized by the horrors of war. The Aegean campaign was a testament to the courage and ingenuity of Lassen and his fellow raiders. They had achieved the impossible, harassing and disrupting a far superior enemy with limited resources and unwavering determination. Their raids had struck fear into the hearts of the Germans, their ability to appear out of nowhere and disappear without a trace, turning them into ghosts that haunted the islands. But the cost had been high. Many of Lassen's comrades had fallen, their lives sacrificed in the pursuit of freedom, and the islands they had fought to liberate were left scarred by the violence, the physical and emotional wounds of war etched deep into the landscape and the hearts of the people. The war was drawing to a close, the tide turning in favor of the Allies, and the focus shifted to the liberation of mainland Greece, a nation that had suffered greatly under the Nazi occupation. Lassen, his reputation as a fearless and resourceful leader preceding him, his name whispered in both awe and fear, was tasked with clearing the eastern coastline of enemy forces, his mission to pave the way for the Allied advance and bring freedom to the Greek people. He and his men, once again relying on the support of the local resistance, their bonds of trust and camaraderie strengthened by shared experiences and a common goal, embarked on a series of daring raids, capturing German garrisons, their surprise attacks, and their superior fighting skills leaving the enemy reeling, disrupting supply lines, cutting off the enemy's ability to reinforce their troops and maintain their hold on the region, and liberating towns and villages, bringing hope and joy to a people who had endured years of oppression. Their most audacious feat, a testament to Lassen's cunning and his ability to inspire his men to achieve the impossible, was the capture of Salonika, Greece's second-largest city, and a vital strategic hub for the Germans. Lassen, with a small force of raiders, their numbers dwarfed by the enemy garrison, their weaponry limited compared to the Germans' arsenal, bluffed the German commander into believing he was facing a much larger force, his charisma and his ability to instill fear in his opponents, turning his small band of men into a formidable army in the minds of the enemy. The Germans, demoralized by their recent defeats and fearing annihilation at the hands of the approaching Allied forces, their confidence shattered by the relentless raids and the knowledge that they were surrounded by enemies, abandoned the city without a fight, their retreat a sign of their waning power and their dwindling hope. Lassen and his men, hailed as liberators, their arrival greeted with cheers and tears of joy, were showered with gratitude by the people of Salonika, their streets filled with jubilant crowds, their hearts filled with hope for a brighter future. But Lassen was not content to rest on his laurels, his desire for action and his hatred of the Nazis still burning brightly within him. He yearned for the big war, the final push against the Nazi regime that would bring an end to their reign of terror and usher in a new era of peace and freedom. His wish was granted, and he was transferred to Italy, where Allied forces were struggling to break through the German lines, their advance stalled by the enemy's fierce resistance and the harsh winter conditions. Lassen and his Irish patrol found themselves operating in a very different environment, one that was far removed from the freedom and flexibility they had enjoyed in the Aegean. The Big War was a world of rigid hierarchies, where rank and protocol held sway, bureaucratic regulations, where every action was governed by a complex web of rules and procedures, and large-scale battles, where thousands of men clashed in bloody confrontations that stretched across vast landscapes. The raiders, accustomed to operating with autonomy, their decisions based on instinct and experience rather than orders from above, and improvising as needed, their resourcefulness and their ability to adapt to changing circumstances, their greatest assets chafed under the constraints of conventional warfare, their independent spirits struggling against the rigid structure and the impersonal nature of the Big War. Lassen, despite the frustrations, his patience tested by the slow pace of the advance and the seemingly endless delays, remained focused on his mission, his determination to defeat the enemy undimmed. He and his men were assigned to Operation Roast, a daring raid across the treacherous waters of Lake Kamakyo, a vast expanse of shallow, murky water that lay between the Allied and German lines. Their objective was to create a diversion, drawing the enemy's attention away from the main Allied assault that was planned for a few miles to the west. Their actions intended to deceive the Germans and give the main force the element of surprise. The operation was fraught with danger, the risks evident to even the most experienced raiders. The lake was shallow, its muddy bottom and its treacherous sandbanks making navigation difficult, even in daylight, exposed, its open waters offering no cover from enemy fire, and surrounded by enemy positions, their watchful eyes scanning the landscape for any sign of movement. Lassen and his men, paddling silently in their canoes, their movements masked by the darkness and the rustling reeds, risked detection with every stroke, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation as they edged closer to the enemy shore. They reached their target, a small island in the middle of the lake, its desolate landscape offering little protection, and dug in, preparing for the inevitable counterattack. Their shovels biting into the earth as they created shallow foxholes, their fingers fumbling with grenades and ammunition as they readied their weapons. The Germans, alerted to their presence by the sounds of their arrival and the faint glow of their cigarettes, unleashed a barrage of artillery fire, the shells screaming through the night sky before exploding in showers of shrapnel and earth. Lassen and his men, trapped in their shallow foxholes, their bodies exposed to the deadly rain of steel, fought back with grenades, their explosions creating momentary pockets of chaos and confusion, and machine guns, their staccato bursts tearing through the darkness, their bullets searching for targets in the flickering light of the flares. But the enemy's firepower was overwhelming, their guns positioned on the surrounding shoreline, their range and accuracy far exceeding that of the raiders' weapons. One by one, the raiders fell, their bodies littering the blood-soaked ground, their lives extinguished in the blink of an eye. Lassen, seeing his men dying around him, his heart heavy with grief and rage, refused to give up, his determination fueled by the sacrifice of his comrades. He rallied his remaining forces, their faces grim, their eyes filled with a mix of fear and resolve, and led a desperate charge against the German positions, his voice ringing out above the din of battle, his words urging them forward, his actions inspiring them to fight on. He hurled grenades, their explosions momentarily silencing the enemy guns, fired his Tommy gun, its bullets spitting defiance into the darkness, and fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal, his every move fueled by a desire to avenge his fallen comrades and complete their mission. But it was a fight he could not win, the odds stacked against him, the enemy's superior firepower and numbers making victory impossible. Lassen was struck by a burst of machine gun fire, the bullets tearing into his body, and fell mortally wounded, his blood staining the ground beneath him. Even as he lay dying, his life ebbing away with each passing moment, he continued to urge his men on, his voice weak but his words filled with conviction. He ordered them to leave him behind and escape with their lives, his concern for their safety overriding his own pain and his own mortality. His final words were a testament to his unwavering courage, his selfless devotion to his comrades, and his unwavering determination to see the mission through, even at the cost of his own life. Lassen's death was a devastating blow to the SBS and to all who knew him. He was a true warrior, a man who lived and died by his own code, his actions guided by a sense of honor, loyalty, and a fierce determination to fight for what he believed in. He was fearless, charging into danger without hesitation, his courage and inspiration to his men, resourceful, his ability to adapt and overcome challenges his greatest asset, and fiercely loyal to his men, willing to sacrifice everything to protect them and ensure their safety. He was also a complex and contradictory figure, capable of great compassion and tenderness, his empathy for the suffering of others evident in his interactions with the Greek people and his concern for their well-being, yet driven by a dark and destructive urge, his hatred of the Nazis and his thirst for revenge fueling his actions on the battlefield. He was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest military honor for gallantry in the face of the enemy, a recognition of his extraordinary courage, his leadership, and his selfless sacrifice. His legacy lives on in the annals of Special Forces history, his name whispered in awe and reverence, and his name is synonymous with courage, determination, and a willingness to sacrifice everything for the cause of freedom. He became a symbol of the fighting spirit, an inspiration to generations of soldiers who followed in his footsteps, and a reminder of the human capacity for both great compassion and terrible violence. The war in Europe ended just weeks after Lassen's death, the Allied forces finally achieving the victory that he had fought so hard for. The Allied forces having broken through the German lines in Italy, their advance spearheaded by the courage and sacrifice of men like Lassen and his fellow raiders, swept northward, liberating towns and cities, their arrival greeted with cheers and tears of joy, and driving the enemy back towards their homeland, their once mighty army now a broken and defeated force. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally, their dreams of conquest shattered, their reign of terror brought to an end. The war that had ravaged Europe for 6 long years, leaving behind a trail of destruction and despair, was finally over, and a new era of peace and rebuilding could begin. The SBS, like many other Special Forces units that had played such a vital role in the Allied victory, was disbanded in the aftermath of the war. The world, weary of conflict, its people exhausted by the years of bloodshed and loss, turned its attention to rebuilding, to healing the wounds of war, and to creating a future free from the horrors that had engulfed the world. But the lessons learned during those dark years, the experiences of men like Lassen and his fellow raiders, would not be forgotten. The tactics and techniques pioneered by these unconventional warriors, their ability to adapt and improvise, their skills in stealth and sabotage, and their understanding of the human element of warfare, would continue to be studied and refined, forming the foundation for modern Special Forces operations and shaping the way future wars would be fought. And the spirit of those brave men who fought and died behind enemy lines, their courage and their sacrifice, an inspiration to all who knew them, would continue to inspire generations of soldiers to come. Their stories would be told and retold, their deeds remembered and honored, and their legacy would live on as a testament to the human spirit's ability to overcome adversity and fight for what is right. They would be remembered as heroes, as legends, and as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for a brighter future. If you enjoyed this summary, please consider subscribing to the channel.